to Sewing with Nancy with your host, Nancy Zieman. This educational videotape is being brought to you by pouf, the largest European producer of sewing machines. Pouf, simply the best. By Pellon, the first name in interfacing and craft materials and the first choice of home sewers for professional results. Pellon, products by Freudenberg. By Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears for home, classroom, and industry. Ginger scissors and shears are the choice of professionals. The McCall Pattern Company, the most fashionable name in contemporary home sewing patterns and publishers of McCall's Patterns, Sewing's fashion magazine. And by Nancy's Notions catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and unique, hard-to-find sewing notions and supplies.
It's time for sewing and time for decorating on this series of Sewing with Nancy, entitled Decorating on the Double. I chose this title because double has a couple of meanings. First of all, it's double or twice. We're going to use 90-inch wide fabric instead of 45, or show you both ways of working with fabric. And also, on the double, quick techniques of speed techniques, but yet techniques that will give you professional-looking results. I'd like to give you a preview of what's going to be in today's program. Fabric can be used for a multitude of decorating ideas, from bed covers to pillows, even covering the walls, to topping windows as valances and curtains. This first program of this series will specialize in valance ideas, to this pouf valance look, as well as doing a cornice valance and a cloud valance. All simple ideas that can be made with kind of speed sewing ideas, and also 45 or 90-inch wide fabric. So stay tuned to be inspired to decorate. The first decorating idea is a pouf valance. You can save sewing time by using 90-inch wide fabric and these fast sewing steps. It's a self-lined valance where the back is shorter than the front, creating a built-in pouf. The key to the gathering effect is a drapery shearing tape. Here's how. The first step of working with valances, particularly in this instance the pouf valance, we need to measure the curtain rod and determine the number of panels and the width of the fabric. You need a calculator, a pencil, and pen at first to get started, but then the sewing will be easy. Let's first of all start with the rod. You'll need a simple curtain rod, not a difficult hardware to purchase or put up, and measure the return, the side of the rod, the length of the rod, and of course the return on the other side. Now this would be mounted around your window, not flat like this, but measure it in the mounted position. Now if we refer to our little display, you can see that this is very full. We have 2.5 times the fullness needed from the curtain rod. And I'll show you how to measure that in just a few minutes, or determine that. Also, the length of this is a standard 15 inches, the length of many valances, but it's self-lined on the back. You can see the same fabric on the back. The back is a little bit shorter than the front to create this automatic pouf, kind of a nice effect. And here's how to go about determining the panels and the yardage that you'd need. For a 32-inch rod, we'd need 2.5 times the fullness, or that happens to be 80 inches. And to that, we need to add an extra 2 inches. There's 1 inch side seams on each side of the curtain, so a total of 82 inches. As I mentioned in our introduction, we're going to be working with double wide fabric, 90 inches, or of course you can work with 45-inch fabric too, or 54. But today we're going to mainly work with 90 and 45. If we needed 82 inches to make this, we would need 1 panel of 90-inch wide fabric. Or for 45-inch fabric, we'd need 2 panels to work with. Now for the length. I said it was 15 inches for the finished length, but because it's self-lined, we need a total of 35 inches. That includes the lining and the pouf part. So 1 panel of 90-inch wide fabric, 35 inches long, is almost a yard. If you're working with 45-inch fabric and you need 2 panels of 35, that's almost 2 yards. 70 inches is almost 2 yards, or is less than 2 yards. So that's how you determine the width. Sometimes after that's determined, the rest of the sewing is easy. Here we have worked a little bit on this sample, and you can see at the side seams have pressed under 1 inch at the side and stitched, and this is done on each side. And then there's a press at the top and press at the bottom. First of all, the top. you're going to press under 10 inches at the top. And from the bottom, press up 5.5 inches. 10 inches and 5.5 inches. The casing for the rod, so that the rod can fit into a pocket, is the first stitch is 1 inch from the top, and then the second stitch is 2.5 inches from the top, so that there's a 1.5 inch width here, so that the curtain rod can fit into this area. So a rod pocket is stitched. Again, just straight stitching. Now to create that pouf, I'll show you the fun part. We're going to shorten the top layer. That 10 inches that I initially press under, I'm going to advance the 10 inches to overlap on the bottom layer so that it's covering it. Let me flip this to the side and you can see how this has been shortened. The next step is to work with shearing tape that you'll find in your drapery section of the fabric store. This is a 2-cord shearing tape, and rather than stitching it on gathered as I'm showing you here, you'd flatten this out and center it over the seam or the cut edge and stitch along the top and then stitch along the bottom. In this sample we have it already sewn. A short little sample, and we have the cords tied at one end and then they're loose on the other end, and we'll just gather it up. And this would be gathered to the finished size of the curtain rod. In our example, it would be gathered to 32 inches. And then tie these and tuck the cords inside. When you put this on the curtain rod, you'll have, just as our example shows, you'll have a pouf at the top and a little ruffle on the bottom, and all mounted to the window just with a curtain rod. It's certainly a decorating on the double great idea. Usually when you hear the word cornice, you think of a wooden cornice board. This hassle-free cornice valance doesn't require any carpentry work, just installing 2 simple curtain rods, and of course a little sewing know-how. Like before, this valance is a 15-inch finished length, and it is self-lined, and we're going to use some drapery tape to speed along our sewing process. I'd like you to measure the curtain rod and again multiply that by 2.5 times to get the fullness needed, and add 2 inches for the 1-inch seams on each side. So as before, we took the measurement including the returns times 2.5 inches plus the seams to determine the number of panels needed. Then for the length, we're going to have a 15-inch finished length, but to do this, because it's self-lined, we need a total of 31 inches. So do your math and determine the yardage needed, whether you're working with 45-inch fabric or 90-inch or 54. Of course, the wider the fabric, the less sewing of seams you'll have to do. Now, for working with the panels of fabric, after they've been sewn together to get the total length, again press under the side seams by 1 inch and top stitch. So they're just 1-inch side seams. And then to determine this, or to get the self-lining effect, press under 8 inches at the top. This is a total of 8 inches. And then from the bottom, do the same, a real simple measurement. This is great for beginner sewers or re-entry sewers, as we like to call those of us who haven't sewn for a while but like to do it again, because there's a lot of straight stitching. You can see this is a flat piece of fabric folded in half twice, and the ends are overlapping about by 1 inch. The key to making this cornice valance is working with the drapery tape called smocking tape. I have this section already gathered, and you can see what a nice effect it gives. Whoop, there we go. But we're going to work with it flat first of all. And let's peel back to our other next panel where we've already stitched this smocking tape over, centering it over the raw edge. And then just straight stitching along the top and bottom edge. Not in the white solid part, but in the kind of meshed area. And this top stitching, of course, will show on the right side. There's more top stitching, and that's to create the little ruffled effect, and that's to sew 1 inch from the fold at the top and the same at the bottom. 1 inch at the bottom. Can't get much simpler than that. A lot of cutting of panels, sewing seams together. On one end of the cornice, please tie the cords, and here we've hidden them in the seam allowance so that they're secure. On the other end, you'll be pulling these together and just pull this to be the size of the finished rod. Now there are two rods, and the rods are inserted below the top stitching and above the top stitching at the bottom. So there's only one row of stitching holding the rods. Now when we refer back to our finished valance at the top, you can see that those rods are held tautly because of the fabric is between the two, so we don't need a second row stitching. And it's a very attractive but quick decorating idea to create. I'm sure you'd like to give that a try. Here's a variation of the popular cloud shade. It's obviously a cloud valance. Make the swags tiered or even for this unique window topper. Like many of our decorating on the double directions, it's all straight sewing with the addition of a special drapery tape called loop tape. I'd like to show you how to do it right now. When making a cloud valance, whether it's tiered or even as this one of the first decisions that you must make is how many clouds or swags you need. Obviously we have 3 here. And to determine this, you have to take the width of your window. In this instance, it's around 30 inches, and divide it between 9 and 15. I know that's a wide variance, but every swag usually comes between 9 and 15 inches. So you could have them closer together for more swags or further apart for less. In this instance, I usually like to look for an odd amount of swags. I think it's more appealing, but of course the decision is yours. An example of a 55-inch window, for example, a little bit wider than the one we've been working with today, if you divide it between 9 and 15, you could have anywhere between 4 and 6 swags. The decisive factor might mean this: the more numbers you have, the smaller the drape you'll have. The fewer swags, the greater the drape. So this is something you'll just have to play around with. It'll be a personal choice. As with the fabric, for determining how much width you need for this fabric, again, measure the curtain rod and multiply it by 2.5 to 3. In our other 2 valances, we worked with 2.5. Here I almost like to go to 3. I think the more fullness you have for this type of window treatment, the better look you'll have. On a 55-inch window, as the example I've used, if you multiply it by 3, you'd need 165 inches of fabric. That's a lot of fabric. And divide it by the width of your fabric that you're using. For example, 90 inches wide or 45 inches wide. The wider the fabric, the fewer seaming you'll have to work with. Now that's the width. So we know we need 165 inches for a 55-inch window. For the length, how to choose that? Well, a cloud valance is very delicate and it doesn't have to be exact. But we've been using 15 inches as an approximate or general finished length for valances. And if you'd like about a 15-inch length or thereabouts for your valance, you'll need to add to that amount 24 inches. You may think, wow, 24 inches, that's a lot. Well, let's look inside this valance, and you can see all of the fabric that has been drawn up to create the poofiness and the cloud effect. We also need extra length for the casing at the top and the hem at the bottom. So that extra 24 inches does a lot. So no matter how long you'd like your valance, to that amount add 24 inches. So now you know the panel lengths that you'll need and also the width that you'll need. And then after cutting your fabric and seaming it, pressing is the next step. If you have a ping pong table or a dining room table that has a covering or a cushion that you could press on your wood table, that's where I'd suggest that you work, because you're going to have a lot of width of fabric. At the side seams, press under 1 inch on both side seams, and at the hem, I pressed under 1/2 inch and then pressed up just a 1 inch hem. So I have a 1 inch hem on both the side as well as on the bottom. Now at the top, we need to allow room for a casing. And you could either serge the edge, or this time, since I was pressing, we just pressed under 1/2 inch and then press under 2.5 inches. This will give you 1.5 inches for the casing and then a 1 inch ruffle at the top. So 2.5 inches at the top is where you'll be. So you have everything pressed right now. No sewing. The sewing will come in just a few minutes. The next step is to think about the tape that you're going to be using. And as I showed you earlier on this sample, I'll show you inside the valance so that you can see what's holding up the swags? There's tape inside with loops in it, and the loops are gathered to create the poofiness. You can look in your fabric department, in your drapery section, to find this type of tape. It's used to make cloud shades, balloon shades, Austrian valances or shades, and it's a lightweight tape that has a loop at the end. Could be why it's called loop tape. And for this, we're going to start by placing this on the wrong side of the fabric, but before we do, I better show you where to put it. You'll need one length of loop tape for each swag, plus one extra. Here's why. We have 3 swags, so we have a length of loop tape on the side, another one in the middle, and then one on the side seam. So for 3 swags, we have 4 rows of tape. If you had 5 swags, you'd use 6 rows of tape, just to give you an indication of how much of this product you need to purchase in order to make a cloud valance. I'm going to start with each length placing one loop at the very bottom hemline area, tucking the excess fabric or excess tape underneath the hem so that there's just a loop at the hem. And for these that are at the sides, I even enclose it. Let's get the loop out. There we go. Enclose it so that it's positioned, the tape end, under the seam allowance. So when I stitch that seam allowance, I'm sewing in the tape. And then just follow it all on up to the top. And do this one for each swag plus an extra. Here we have most of these pinned. And now it's time to do some top stitching. And we're going to attach the tape, hem this curtain all at once. Across the bottom, just run a row of straight stitching, catching the hem and then catching that loop tape at every position. And sometimes I bar tack just a little bit extra at these areas. Then when stitching the side seam, you could place the tape underneath the seam allowance and stitch that down as well. But all the tapes that are in the middle need a little extra catching. When I look at the finished valance, I don't do straight stitching down the center. So if we refer to that, you'll see that it's nice and loose and airy in this area. I haven't stitched down the tape in this area, but rather bar tacked it. And that made the valance fall much nicer. Here in the middle, we'd go at the sewing machine and just bar tack at each place. You can see that I'm just stitching in place at each loop, advancing the fabric, stitching at the other loop, advancing the fabric, and that's how I tack down the loop tape. After bar tacking at each loop, make sure that you trim away all the excess threads, and the last stitching that's needed is to stitch the casing for the rod or the rod pocket. On this sample, remember we pressed under 2.5 inches at the top and stitch 1 inch from the fold and a second stitching 1.5 inches down, or 2.5 inches from the fold. And this is where the rod will be inserted. The sewing's done. Now it's time to do a little tying of the loops to create the valance swags. I've already on the side seam attached 4 of the loops together, tied them together. And this is what you do at each section. Through the loop, draw a cord. And we'll just put these together and tie these so that they create the swag. And this is how you get a cloud effect. It's so much easier making a cloud valance than a cloud shade because then these don't have to work later on. They can just be stationary. And you tie these together. And I usually make sure I leave a length so that I can untie it if I'd like to launder this. But let me show you what it looks like from the front side. You can see how that cloud is starting to shape. Refer to our finished sample. Just put it on top of or insert a rod. Tie all the loop tape sections and presto, you have a cloud valance. To review the 3 valances that I made today, let's take a quick look at the back side of them. This tells a lot of the story. For that pouf valance, we used a 2-cord shearing tape by Gosling tape to sew where the 2 fabrics overlapped. Remember that the top layer, the front layer, is longer than the back, creating that automatic pouf, a very feminine look. Another type of tape was used for that cornice board look, or the cornice valance. Since this is off the fabric, it looks a little different, but notice that on the back side that was top stitched right in the center and pulled together. The smocking tape gave a very elegant look. Or for a cloud tape or cloud shade, use the loop tape with the little loops in. The loops can be gathered together to create the swags. I hope you're inspired to try one of these valance ideas in a bedroom, guest room, or even a kitchen. They're great window toppers. Welcome to Sewing with Nancy. This is my second program of this series, Decorating on the Double. Decorating on the double meaning double wide fabric, 90 inches wide, as well as double quick techniques, speed sewing techniques. And today we're going to work on techniques for bedroom accents. I recently had the opportunity of seeing 2 rooms decorated by the staff of the McCall Pattern Company, where they featured, first of all, the bedroom with a duvet or comforter for a coverlet and a dust ruffle, as well as covering a sofa or chair with fabric. It was a beautiful way to coordinate fabrics and ideas for a soft Victorian look. We're going to do many of these coverings today, both working with the duvet, the ruffle, and covering a chair. It's really quite simple. The key is wide fabric and a little sewing know-how. And I'd like to pass that on to you in just a few minutes. We're going to do a lot of decorating ideas for a bedroom. We're going to start with a duvet. A duvet, or a comforter cover, securely holds a comforter in place, yet it only takes a few hours to sew. This design uses coordinating prints on both the top and bottom sides. Making a duvet requires a lot of straight stitching. Just as in our preceding program we worked with valances and a lot of straight stitching, here again is a beginner and straight stitching sewer's delight. We'll be working with large pieces of fabric, large rectangles for the duvet, and I'm going to be showing you on mini scale. We have a finished queen-size duvet in the back that I'll show you when I'm done. First of all, measure an existing comforter for speed. Use an existing quilt or comforter that you have and just cover it. Measure the size. For example, my double or queen-size comforter was 90 by 108 inches. So I would make sure that my top layer was exactly that size, 90 by 108 inches. You may think, shouldn't we have seam allowances? Well, it's best to make it a little bit smaller than the comforter so that the comforter fills out the duvet or the cover. Now, keep in mind we're working with either 45 or 90-inch wide fabric. For 90-inch wide fabric, you'd have 1 panel of fabric. But this is to represent 45-inch wide fabric. You'd need 2 panels. Keep 1 panel whole and place it in the center. Here you can see our side seams indicating that the other panel was split down the length of it and sewn to each side of the other panel. So we have 2 seams here. So the whole panel is kept in the middle and the other panel split down the length and sewn. So we have 2 seams. It's almost divided into thirds. Now the back would also be cut to the same width as the top, but a little bit longer. Please cut the back panel 1.5 inches longer than needed. This will allow you for a seam to place a zipper into place. So in this instance it would be 90 inches by 109.5. So you can see a big rectangles of fabric. The zippers were how you're going to get in and out of get the comforter in and out of the duvet. And on this sample I folded under proportionately, I folded under 15 inches. On a big size, you'd fold under 15 inches. This is much less, of course, and then stitch 3/4 of an inch from the whole fold. This is the seam where the zipper is going to be placed. It's a fold, unless you cut it open. And we can just cut this partially open, and through this, which I've already done, almost to the whole length, through this area, then you're going to insert the zipper. Now you can just top stitch a zipper into place, and you need about a 36-inch length zipper. So you can buy zippers by the yard, or if you can't find zippers long enough, take 2 shorter 18-inch zippers and meet them end to end. Of course, you'd fold under the tape or zigzag the tape so that the ends could meet in the middle, but this will give you the length that you need. Again, this is 36 inches on a full-size duvet or comforter cover. After you have the zipper placed, then meet right sides together of the duvet pieces and serge or sew, encasing all 4 edges. Again, like I mentioned earlier, like making a pillowcase. Only here you need to add some snaps about every 20 inches or so. We have a snap tape, and I've sewn part of the snap tape, the socket part, to each corner, and sew that right in the seam. And then to the comforter, sew the ball part of the snap tape and simply snap together. Now keep in mind that on a larger side you need to do this more than just 4 times at each corner. Now we'll just snap it together. And I'm meeting the comforter to the wrong side of the face or the top of the comforter, because now I'll just go through the zipper. In other words, make sure the zipper is on top. And bring the comforter inside the cover. This makes a fun decorating idea because you could change it if you were so inclined with the seasons, or frequently if you'd like to. And it takes a bit to fluff this out, but when you do, you have a nice cover. And I'll primp this a little bit more, but on this finished sample you can see you can make it reversible, or you can make it all one fabric. Sewing a dust ruffle is a perfect topic for decorating on the double because it can be sewn with extra wide fabric and in a very short period of time. I'm going to use many of the same concepts of measuring and cutting panels for valances or a duvet when working with a dust ruffle. Here we have a mini bed, and when working with a dust ruffle, obviously you're going to be working with the box spring or the area between the mattress and the box spring. So we'll remove the mattress and measure 3 sides of the box spring, measuring the 2 long lengths and then the foot of the bed. On the twin size bed, if you measure these 3 sides, you'll get approximately 200 inches. And you'll need to multiply that by 2.5. So on a twin bed, I would need 500 inches of fabric for that dust ruffle to be gathered or pleated. Now for the length of the fabric, you'll measure from the top of the box spring to the floor and add 3 inches for hems at the top and bottom. A traditional length of the dust ruffle I have at home is 13 inches. So I would add 3 inches to make it 16. Now in cutting panels of fabric, you're going to be cutting in whole panels of fabric. Let's refer back to that total 500 inches that I needed earlier. I divide that, let's say, by 90-inch wide fabric. Check out with your calculator, but that equals 5.5. You can't just buy half a panel or cut a half a panel. You have to cut a whole length. This is the width from cut edge to cut edge of one panel, and then you trim off the excess fabric. So actually when determining yardage, I would have to buy 6 panels worth of fabric. After you've determined your amount of fabric that you'll need, simply serge or sew the side seams together quickly as you can. 5/8 isn't needed, just a simple 1/2 inch, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance is fine. And then across the bottom and sides you'll need hems. For decorating, for most of the time, you're going to use simple 1-inch hem allowance. At the side we have 1 inch, at the bottom 1 inch, and just press and top stitch the hems into place. Now along the top, for the simplest of decorating ideas, I like to use a folding tape. You'll find this tape in your fabric store decorating section, and it's not necessarily designed for dust ruffles but works well for them. I have this already gathered, and you can see that the folds that are created. Now with this tape you're going to sew it to the wrong side of the fabric at the top, stitching along the top edge and the lower edge, being careful not to stitch or catch these cords in the stitching. Now again, you'll have a large length of fabric, and at one end tie the cords together. Simply tie them and then pull the cords together. This is a fast way of gathering, and it's already pleated for you very nicely. Now in a dust ruffle, you really wouldn't like these pleats to be popping up as you see here. So now I'd like you to cut a facing strip, just a 2-inch wide or so piece of fabric that's as long as 3 sides of the mattress. So in this instance, the 200 inches. And overlap this on the right side on top of the taped area so that you will be stitching the pleat flat. On this next sample, short little sample, we have the facing strip top stitched all the way down to hold the pleats comfortably and neatly in place. Put an old fitted sheet on your box spring, pin the strip right to your fitted sheet, and then later take it off and sew it on. And that will give you a dust ruffle on the double. Now to cover a sofa or chair with fabric. You may think, well, I'm not really into upholstery. Well, this cover is a combination of draping, wrapping fabric, and sewing. It's a perfect way to cover a bedroom or casually used chair or sofa. I'd like to show you how now. How many of you at home have a wonderful green chair or avocado green or gold that is just kind of hiding someplace in the basement or a rec room and you wish you could cover it? Well, you can cover it with fabric very simply, and I'll give you the techniques right now. It needs to be a chair that has unattached cushions, floating cushions. Take out the cushions and we'll start measuring the chair. I wish I had a before and after photo to show you this chair because it really will change the looks of it. We're first going to measure a couple of main body pieces for the chair, measuring from the base of the chair over the arm, and then if you have a deeper part of the chair, measuring at its deepest point across the seat, and then measuring again from the other arm of the chair to the floor. And make sure that that tape measure slips right down into the corner area so that you'll have plenty of fabric. Now if this fabric or this measurement is 90 inches or less and you are working with 90-inch wide fabric, you only need to use one big rectangle of fabric, because the next measurement is to measure from the base and the back, across the back to the front. And I'll start just to measure this for you. And there you could get the size of your rectangle, just keeping measuring. Here you can see our sofa, and it is without the cushions, and how one piece of fabric was draped across the body of it, making it very easy to work with. The chair that I'm working with, and it has 54-inch fabric, so I'll need to cut this into sections. I have 2 of the sections already placed. One main body piece covering the seat and the back to the floor, and then 2 pieces going over the arm. I'll show you how to do this in just a minute, but first I want to finish cutting the main pieces, and that will be for the cushions. Covering the cushions is like wrapping a present. You'll have to have enough fabric to go all the way around the cushion, just like you would tissue paper or wrapping paper to go around a gift box. This is obviously has a large print to it, and from the right side I've already determined that I'd like this large floral motif to be at the center of the cushion back. So if you're working with a print such as this, make sure that you allow additional fabric. The key to this is not a lot of stitching, but a lot of pinning. Safety pins. We're going to wrap this very smoothly with making the fabric taut, and then get large safety pins like a size 2 or 3. Many times you'll find these in the quilting section of your fabric store. They're that large of a safety pin. Now I mentioned earlier, this is a great type of covering idea for a casually used sofa or chair. This is something that you're not going to put in the rec room with 8- and 5-year-olds bouncing up and down the furniture. This is for kind of bedroom furniture, maybe patio furniture, something that isn't used extensively. And then wrap the ends, bringing the fabric around. Now this may take just a little bit more time than I'm taking right now to wrap the square corners. The underneath side isn't going to show, so you don't have to worry about this. Just make sure that your corners are the way you'd like them. And then pin. Now if you couldn't find fabric that you wanted to use, you could also use designer sheets. That's a nice option as well. So pretty soon I'll have my cushion covered. This is my kind of reupholstering. All right, so you can see within a couple of minutes, presto, we have a cushion that has been covered. And we have the flower just about in the center area. Now these corners are square. If you had rounded corners, here's my recommendation. Here again we have pinned the fabric along the back side, but at the corners, rather than just folding it like a present, wrapping paper around a present, you can see we've twisted the fabric so that the fabric molds around the shape. And then again, pin it down. Give that a try. I'm in the process of putting the fabric on the other arm, and one of the main body pieces has been just cut in a rectangle shape. You have to make sure you'll have enough fabric to cover, here we go, to the base area. And the key area is to have along the arm to make sure the fabric is straight. And do a lot of tucking and tuck the fabric into the crease area. But then near the bottom, you're going to bring all the excess fullness to the front and pin. Let's go over to the other side that's already finished, and you can see at the bottom you have big safety pins holding the fabric down, and how all the excess fabric was brought to the front and pinned. Let me take a few minutes out and finish this. After about 10 to 15 minutes of wrapping and draping and pinning, I have most of the ugly green, or I should say all of my ugly green chair covered. Again, we've used safety pins, large pins along the base to hold the fabric down. Now to finish it, we have to cover all these edges and raw edges. We're going to make a very narrow dust ruffle like we used for the bed, but this time it's going to be pinned to the top side. This is about 6 to 8 inches long, depending upon what you'd like for your chair. On the inside, we've used that same folding tape that we used for the dust ruffle. I'll give you another option as well. You'll see that I cut the fabric about 10 or so inches long, folded up a hem at the bottom, a little hem on the sides, and then at the top, stitched the tape. And then on the front side, you can see that we have again the little pleats that are kind of springing out. For a ruffle around the chair, please flatten these and follow one of your original stitching lines and top stitch this flat so that it stays flat. Again, just basic straight stitching. Now to attach this, one of the simplest ways is to use a screw pin, the type that you may use at home to hold armchair caps on that sometimes come with the sofas. You can buy these by the package and simply screw this through the fabric layers. This takes a little time, a little muscle actually, to get all the screw through all the layers of fabric. Try to hide it if you can underneath a pleat. Let me get it started first of all. And I'll pin it kind of so that you can see it more readily. But when I'm doing this at home for good, I'm going to hide these underneath the pleats and then just get that screwed in tightly. And every so many inches, screw that into the fabric, and I'm going to pin just the rest so you can get a quick idea how this is finished. After pinning this, then finish it by placing your sofas or the cushions into the chair or sofa, and presto. We don't have our ugly green chair anymore, but a very nice casual chair. It's going to go from my basement to my guest bedroom. And I mentioned too that if you would like a different look at the lower edge, you could also put a gathered edge. Here you can see we made a casing, or there's a casing at the top of the ruffle section, and through the casing there's elastic. And you can simply put this around the lower edge and then again attach it with pins, screw pins, or Velcro if you'd like. There's many ways of making this chair. You can decorate it on the double with these fast wrapping, sewing, and draping ideas. In today's program, used a lot of straight stitching and stitching on tape for the dust ruffle and for the ruffle around the chair. I use the gosling tape called the folding tape. Many times this is used for curtains, but it worked very effectively for the double ruff or for the ruffles. It has 2 draw cords, and you just stitch it to the top. On the chair, the finishing touch, we clean finish both the top edge and the lower edge. And then to make these pleats lie flat, you'd simply remember again to top stitch this in place. The only variation for the dust ruffle is at the top is to apply a facing, a 2-inch wide facing, so that the ruffle then could be stitched to the fitted sheet along or around the box spring. Two very versatile ways of using this folding tape. It makes really decorating very quick and very neat. The pleats are nice and even. Our next program on decorating the double will have some ideas for a vanity and pillows, again using wide fabric and speedy techniques. Bye. It's time for sewing. Welcome to Sewing with Nancy, and today we're going to be decorating. Our third program on decorating on the double. In many of the preceding programs we've worked with specific projects, and we'll do that today. But let's start off by giving you some ideas that don't require a lot of sewing. You may have closet shelves that are just crying to be covered. Well, why not use fabric to cover the shelves? It works out very well using double-sided tape. If you have some leftover fabric, why not take the scraps of the fabric along with a little ribbon and finish some towels for your bathroom, a perfect addition. But in today's program, we're going to be working with very specific ideas of pillows, a vanity, and roller shades. I have one of our projects right here. We're going to be covering a table any size or shape, showing you how to make a vanity or skirting cover. It takes a lot of straight sewing, a little bit of gathering, and a little sewing know-how, which I'll give you next. Stay tuned and I'll get set up to make some pillows. I'd like to start off with a neckroll pillow that can be made in minutes. This quick throw pillow with a neckroll shape is made from small rectangles of fabric and decorating tape. Like many of our decorating on a double sewing ideas, the sewing time for this neckroll pillow is really cut to a minimum. Let's start off by taking a close-up look of the pillow, and I'll point out some of the details that we're going to cover. We're going to actually start with a large rectangle of fabric and do a lot of straight stitching to sew in the ruffle shape, as well as the casing in the middle that's drawn together with ribbon. Down the center of the pillow is a smocking tape, but applied obviously to the wrong side to give this nice ruffled look. This is the same type of decorator tape that I used earlier in this series when making valances. So here's how to go about making this pillow. The rectangle of fabric is 45 inches wide, the width of many fabrics. If you're using 90-inch wide fabric, simply cut it in half. And the length of the fabric is 28 inches, so 45 by 28. And I have done a lot of pre-pressing on this to save some time for stitching and to ensure accuracy. Along the long edges, you're going to do the same two types of pressing. Pressing under at the top, 1 inch at the top. This will be the casing for the ribbon. And then after pressing under 1 inch, fold under 5 inches. 5 inches from the folded edge to the folded edge. The same two pressings are done along the lower edge. 1 inch for the casing, and then folding up 5 inches for the ruffled area. I have one more pressing to do, and that's the center. Now the center press is more of a marking because this will be the placement for the decorator tape. You can either finger press or press with an iron to get the center of the fabric. So 5 quick pressings or pre-pressings will save some time later on. The first row of stitching is going to be apply the smocking tape, and this is a much smaller sample. But down the center press is where you're going to place the smocking tape, centering the tape over the pressing mark. You can lightly see that pressing mark, placing the tape over the mark, and then top stitching along each edge, sewing the tape in place. After stitching the tape down, then you can sew the side seams. You'll have to kind of unpress, not unpress, but unfold the pressing areas and sew this long seam. Here's one precaution though, stopping and starting the seam about 5/8 of an inch from the cut edge, not sewing down these cut edges. The reason for that is that this will allow for the opening for the ribbon. It will be the opening for the casing. So start at 5/8 at one end and end 5/8 over the edge from the other, not sewing down to the very cut edges. I'll show you that already on the next sample, how that's been made. Again, if you'd like to straight stitch, this is perfect. because after sewing the first long seam, we're sewing the side seam, then top stitch under that first 1-inch press. And here you can see the opening where later on the ribbon can be drawn through this casing. After top stitching that 1 inch under, then fold it again at that 5-inch pre-press mark. And to get the ruffled edge, stitch 2 inches from the fold. This is a 2-inch measurement, stitching all the way around. And in the booklet that accompanies this series, we'll give you all these exact directions. Do the same 2 markings at the other end, or top stitchings, I should say. Now before turning this right side out, gather the tape that's in the middle, gathering it to about 14 inches, or the circumference of your neck roll. And just keep gathering this and tie it in a knot until it's the right size. And when you turn this right side out, you'll have the look as we have on this pillow. We've inserted through the middle opening a roll. And if you do not have a neck roll pillow form at home, you can just use some batting, rolling it until it gets to a 5-inch diameter, inserting it into the roll, gathering up the ribbon, and presto, a fun decorating idea. How many of you have a small table tucked away in the attic or hidden in a corner? Turn that table into an attractive vanity or end table, perfect for your guest room or bedroom. The underneath table doesn't have to be a family heirloom. You can use an inexpensive table and legs, and that can be decorated equally with great style. Here's how. Let's take a closer look at our smaller sample vanity table, the skirting. There are 3 main pieces to the skirting. The top fabric, which covers the top area obviously, and seamed to that top main piece is a 3-inch facing. And the 3-inch facing is kind of a connector piece that connects the top of the table and the ruffle. The ruffle is attached to this facing. Gives it a nice drape. Now to measure the table, to determine how much fabric you need to buy, let's just take off our skirting and measure around the circumference of the top. Just measure around, and the rectangle size would be 2.5 times the total circumference of the table, 2.5 times. Now for the table length, or for the skirting length, measuring from the tabletop to the hem, if you're going to sew this with a conventional sewing machine, cut the skirting the exact length of the table to the hem. If you're serging, cut it 2 inches shorter. I'll show you why in a minute. But the length to the hem, the same length for a conventional machine, or 2 inches shorter for the serger. Now to get the size of the tabletop, you can trace the size of the tabletop by flipping it over and tracing on some paper and adding about a 1/2-inch seam allowance all the way around for your size. So if you had a different shape rather than just a circle, you could copy the exact size. Let's take a closer look at the skirting to explain why, when working with that rectangle of fabric and serging, you need to shorten it by 2 inches. The top and the bottom are finished with a rolled edge stitch, and then are stitched to our facing piece. So that's why we're cutting it 2 inches smaller. The next step is to gather the ruffling area. I'll show you how. Zigzagging over clear elastic is one of my favorite ways of gathering. I've cut this elastic to the circumference of the tabletop, the exact size, and I've divided the elastic into quarters. Here you can see a ballpoint pen mark at one of the quarter marks. If you had a very large table, you may even like to divide it into eighths. It may be easier to work with. Remembering the skirting is 2.5 times the circumference of the table. That will usually do it for medium to lightweight fabric. If you're concerned that it will not gather down to that size, you may want to do a test run first of all. Take 10 inches of elastic and see how much it can stretch out to, or to get your finished size. But I know that I'm going to end up with just about the right size by zigzagging over the elastic. I have the elastic pinned to the wrong side of the fabric, and notice that I have it about a 1/2 inch from the fold. And then simply stretch. Now this stuff will stretch to 3 times its length, so this will work out very well for this gathering idea. So just zigzag. And we've used this gathering technique for other types of sewing, not only just for home decorating, but it will work for garment construction as well. And it's just a fun way to gather. It takes all the guesswork out of it. after going all the way around the skirting, you'll find that this is what it will look like. Obviously, you'd work with matching thread, not contrasting thread, and then check to make sure that you have about the size of your tabletop, that it gathered down to the right size. Earlier we mentioned about that facing piece. And that facing piece obviously is a connector between the top of the vanity and the skirt. It's 3 inches wide, and here we have a line stitched 1 inch from the lower edge, or you can mark a line with a washable marking pen 1 inch from the lower edge, so that you can butt or meet the ruffled edge next to that 1 inch mark, and simply top stitch with a straight stitch the ruffled edge to the facing piece. Probably one of the most time-consuming parts about making this vanity cover or skirting cover is to attach the facing to the rounded or shaped top fabric. It might take a little easing, a little extra time, but by adding this facing, the skirting drops nicely from the top of the table without having the ruffle at the very edge. Give this a try. It's really quite fast. My next decorating on the double idea is to make a quick and easy roller shade. Earlier in this series we worked with the cloud valances. Now to top this off and to completely dress the window, we have coordinating fabric for the roller shade. This really is simple. It's a lot of pressing, just a little bit of sewing, and of course some measuring. We're going to be working with some roller shade fabric, and that's really the key, obviously, of making a shade. Look for the type of shade fabric. My favorite is to have kind of a rubberized white backing. And then on the other side you'll see fusible interfacing. It's rather heavy but not crisp. It's a very nice fabric and very comparable with this rubber backing to rather expensive roller shades, but we can make that. The key is to use an existing roller shade or to purchase an inexpensive roller shade and mount up the roller and then put on a different shade. And that's actually what we did in our little sample window, is purchase a roller shade and then place the mountings up and then did some measuring. And I'll show you how we did the measuring. Measure in a couple places on the window the width. Measuring this time the roller shade. You might want to check. I'm sure that's going to be the right distance all the way down, but in this instance it would be around 18 inches wide. And the length from the top of the roller shade to the bottom of the sill, or wherever you'd like the roller shade to end. To that measurement add 12 inches. So you're going to add 2 inches to the width measurement, take 18 and add 2 inches. We'll trim it a little bit later. And then to the length add 12 inches. It's for hemming and roller ease that you'll need the extra lengths and widths. Now the roller shade fabric that I showed you earlier is quite wide, but you may have a window that's even wider. If you have that, you can run this shade fabric on the crosswise grain. It doesn't matter. It can be run length or width. The important part to mention about this, or to keep in mind, is that just have it on one grain or the other, not on the bias or cockeyed. Just straight grain or crosswise grain. I've cut this 2 inches wider for my sample, a little bit longer. And then the fashion fabric, I even cut that just a little bit larger than the roller shade fabric. You can use lightweight fabrics, medium weight fabrics, but not shears. Going to place on my table the white side down and cover it with the fashion fabric. And here's where you have to make certain that the fabrics were cut on grain. Just make sure everything is square and equal, because that will affect how the fabric, especially if it's a print, which this isn't, but if it were a print, you'd definitely see if it were on the grain were not correct. A nice thing about this too is that you can also use wallpaper. Now this is a fusible shade fabric, and for working with fabric we'll simply cover this like a fusible with a damp cloth. Now let me just review this one quick time. We have the white side of the shade fabric down, and then the right side of the fashion fabric facing you, covered with a damp cloth. Like fusing on interfacing, we're going to use many of the same techniques, and that is to have the iron set at the wool setting. We have a damp cloth, and on a test sample, please test first. Press 5 to 15 seconds. The lighter weight the fabric, the less amount of time you'll need. And notice that when I'm pressing, I'm kind of overlapping my previous pressed area so that I get a secure bond. And I'm pressing this on in a roll-like area, just creating a row of pressing. 5 to 10 seconds, and I'm doing about 5 seconds per area. Now while I'm letting this first little sample roll dry, I'd like to mention something about the pressing surface. I'm not working with my little ironing board, and I would recommend that you use a tabletop that has been covered, of course, or a cardboard table, ping pong table, something flat and large, because on a roller shade you're going to have a lot of width and length, and to work on an ironing board that has a little odd shape, it's not going to press as easily. You'll need a large flat surface. Now, I've only pressed the top area, but I think I've let it dry long enough to check for air bubbles. Now, I did a pretty good job of pressing, actually, but here's a little air bubble. It may be a little difficult to see, and you can usually just see it from the white side, but if you do get an air bubble where it wasn't pressed properly, puncture the white fabric, the shade fabric, with a pin, work out the air, check the entire length of your shade, flip it around to the other side, and then cover and press again. Never, never press from the rubberized side, only from the fabric side. So this is really simple. So far we've just cut a little bit larger, a little bit longer, fused on the fabric, and after the entire fabric has been fused and you've checked for air bubbles, then we'll do it cutting it to the right size. This is where I like to be as accurate as possible, and we're going to measure this, get my ruler, and measure about 1 inch in from the edges. And lightly make a mark with your pencil. And then cut with your scissors or rotary cutter, cutting this to the right side. Now this backing area is rubberized, so luckily the fabric will not really move or shift. And we'll just cut away to the right size, miscutting the top. There we go. Now on this next sample, where I have it almost ready to put on, the last step was to fold up 1.5 inches and stitch 1 1/4 inches from the edge, and then immediately put in the little dowel across the bottom. I say immediately because the rubberized material sticks together, and the sooner you can put it in, the faster it will work. Make note, when you purchased your rod, which way the shade came off. In other words, you can see how it's rolling off. Then either tape or staple the shade to the rod just as it came and install it or put it up. And within a matter of maybe an hour or two, you'll have a decorator shade. Throughout this series, I've been working with very simple projects, a lot of straight sewing, which requires some initial measuring, but you can see the results are very effective. One of the final ideas that I'd like to share with you is sewing a shower curtain. My final decorating idea is a shower curtain sewn with 90-inch wide fabric, so it's simple or elaborate with a valance or canopy heading. Most shower curtains are 90 inches wide. Using the doubly wide fabric eliminates sewing the side seams. The simplest of all shower curtains to sew requires just a few seams. To sew a super simple shower curtain, turn under and sew 1-inch side seams, a 3-inch top and bottom hem, and then add buttonholes to the top for the shower hooks. This truly is a decorating on the double idea. Next, I'll review some of the topics of today. Let's review today's program by pointing out some of the products that we used. First of all, to work with the roller shade, we used a very specific type of material called Wonder Shade for the actual shade product. It has a rubberized backing, and the Wonder Shade has a fusible side, very comparable to the custom-made roller shades. It really is quite fun to make shades that coordinate with your wallpaper or fabric. Remember to use clear elastic when gathering. The elastic will stretch to 3 times its length so that you can gather quite a lot of fabric by just zigzagging over the elastic on the wrong side. The first project today was that neckroll pillow, and the key ingredient for getting the gathering or the smocking in the center was the smocking tape. The smocking tape can be found in the decorating section of your fabric store. Look for the gosling tapes that when they gather up, they give a nice smocking effect. I hope you've enjoyed our series on decorating on the double and will be inspired to make some changes in your home.
This educational videotape has been brought to you in part by pouf, simply the best European line of sewing machines. By Pellon, quality products by Freudenberg. By Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears. The McCall Pattern Company, the most fashionable name in contemporary home sewing patterns. And by Nancy's Notion Sewing Catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and notions.